Welcome to Portals of Perception and to dispatches from the developmental edge and or dispatches from gatherings at the developmental edge. We are asking what is emerging at the edge and the kind of possibilities that specifically reveal themselves at live in-person gatherings. And I'm here with Tucker Walsh. We've actually been in a dialogue about these inquiries over the last couple of years on earlier Portals conversations. And the unifying awareness is we sense that there is something unique that's emerging, that's revealing itself with individuals and with configurations of people, small and medium-sized configurations, perhaps also with large configurations of people when we come together in terms of seeking to discover what is emerging with us and you. And we have this vision that we're going to bring other people to play with us in this Portals series that we will call Gatherings at the Developmental Edge. And this then is our framing conversation to describe the inquiry landscape. So Tucker, welcome. It's great to have you back on Portals and playing in this space to explore together.
Thank you, Aviv. I'm really looking forward to being here.
So let us begin by asking first, what are the inquiries that are alive for you? You have recently, in recent months, helped shape, convene, pull together a number of gatherings. You've also have been involved with longer inquiry of residential communal endeavors, and there is a parallelity, if there is such a word. They are adjacent endeavors. What specifically are the live inquiries you have in mind and working with you at this time about gatherings at the developmental edge? And then I'd like to explore with you some of the recent experiences. What were you trying to facilitate in those, and what are some of the insights and the learning? So that's a full menu. Please offer a beginning inquiry that's alive for you about this potent and important space.
Thank you. I notice I feel a little bit shy around the framing of the developmental edge, and perhaps how I want to frame it is that mostly I'll be speaking at the edge of my developmental edge, or yeah, I guess that makes sense, at the edge of my developmental edge. And I don't want to have the hubris to claim that I'm speaking on behalf of, I don't know, humanity's developmental edge or the cosmos developmental edge. And in a sense, there's a way in which these gatherings may represent that, depending on how you sort of construct your sense of development and your sense of what, you know, evolutionary trajectory is bringing us towards. And in another sense, the developmental edge could be literally the concrete developmental edge of new communities that are actually being built and constructed around the world, some of which I've had really the privilege to be a part of the co-creative process of. So, yeah. I'm going to pause there and let you restate the question.
Well, so yes to all three premises. The developmental edge in the way we are rich and other people that we will bring in the future to play with us, the way you're experiencing it in your own living embodied journey, number one. Number two, what occurs when you are with others. Number three, the permission to imagine that we are a fractal of the whole, a fractal of the universe at large. And that actually is going to feature when I offer some of my current insights about this. And fourthly, actually, what you offered, what is practically emerging in terms of communal endeavors. And they often feel lonely sometime and barely resourced enough, and yet we are seeing in the phenomena of those new arisings, we're seeking to discover, to decode what's working well for them, and we appreciate the significance in those arising. So all four layers we are interested in. And the question I would offer then is, what are the questions, what are the inquiries that are leading you now as you reflect on these 4 layers of opportunity?
Yeah. There's some way in which it might feel a little bit like I'm dodging the question, but it almost just feels like a body first impulse. It's like a eros impulse of movement and motion towards a certain flavor of experience, towards a certain shape of consciousness. And the gatherings that I am most excited about are the places where individually and then from a collective perspective as well, I sense there's like a deep homecoming, a deep sense of belonging that feels deeply personal and transpersonal at the same time. And often that sense of belonging happens for each individual in their own way, and it happens collectively as a group, and then it happens from a sense of looking at sort of the macro perspective of the different shifts happening in society and humanity, the different, so-called meta-crises that are out there, and how these particular gatherings or in-person collectives can help to be little puzzle pieces in the in the game of life, as we're playing it through this particular moment in time and space. So I have this phrase that I like to, it's more like a mantra for what home feels like for me. And it's home is that feeling that there's no place in the entire universe I'd rather be than right here, right now. And so it's just this sense of like a deep, grounded settledness. And from that place, often I find there's an upshift of energy. Like there's just like an impulse from life itself to kind of express and to create and to connect and to celebrate. And sometimes that looks like resting my shoulder on a friend's head, or resting my head on a friend's shoulder rather. And sometimes that looks like, like running into the action of trying to solve a challenge, or it can take on an infinite number of expressions, but it's this feeling of life itself naturally knows how it wants to come through each of us and all of us and find ways to love itself even more fully and wholly. And so the gatherings that I'm most attracted to personally, and the ones that I'm helping to create, often have this felt sense first quality to them. Like we can have our narratives and our stories about what they are and why they're important, and all of those framings. Yeah, I see them as being, I'm a filmmaker in the past and a storyteller. So I love the storytelling aspect of all of the ways in which we talk about these gatherings. But often the stories and the words are sort of energetic transmissions into the energy, into the body, into the felt sense, the sensorial world of aliveness that then sort of does its own thing on so many more levels that the intellectual cognitive mind, is barely keeping up with narrating it as it's happening, because it's happening, so fast, and the mind is kind of there witnessing it and then making sense of it after it's already kind of transpired in some way. So that's part of the dance as well. Like right now, I feel a sense of aliveness speaking from the energy of what these gatherings help me become more home into and feel more fully a part of. Yeah, I'll pause there.
It opens 5 inquiry lines for me, and I see that Turquoise is here to join us. So there you go.
Hello, Turquoise.
Hey, Turquoise. We actually already launched a recorded conversation. So what do you advise, Tucker?
Well, First off, hello. It's good to see you.
Hello.
Can you hear us? Okay.
Hello.
Hello. So we're diving into a conversation around the different gatherings and conferences and whatnot that I've been a part of, and you've obviously been at several of those, and sort of setting the frame for a larger, potentially a series of conversations to come. Yeah, I mean, Turquoise, whenever we talk about community, I feel so deeply connected and in resonance with you on that. So I'm curious, how much time do you have? And is this something that you would want to be a part of, or?
This alert kept pinging and I wanted to leave that and come say hi. It's really, and just like, you guys are in my heart. I don't know who was going to show up today, but I wanted to be here. And so I just wanted to drop in and say hi and see if you guys still had it, because I saw the email thread going on and I wasn't able to get back, but I wanted to let you know I'm tracking it and it's in my intentions, and see, just show it, make an appearance and see.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, first, it's great to meet you, Turquoise. I love hearing the voice, and I heard the voice before when you revealed to me that there was an audio feature on LinkedIn.
Yes.
So what Tucker and I are doing here, really, we are creating an initial framing conversation to what we hope will be a series of explorations, all to do with gatherings at the developmental edge. What are we trying to facilitate? What are their natures and character? How do they work best? What is the intelligence that they bring to us, and so on and so forth. So that's the inquiry space, and we realized we were the two of us, so we said, okay, this is probably a framing conversation. Well, so as we were planning this conversation, we thought there may be few people joining us, and in the end we found ourselves beginning this conversation, Tucker and I, by ourselves, and Turquoise has just joined us. And Tucker, in many ways, this is a fractal of the nature of live gatherings. So how will you bridge from this, just what is arising here in the moment, to what you started to describe, where you essentially said the first primary nature of the gatherings you are drawn to and energized by are those where you have that embodied felt sense of being at home. And I was about to ask you, what is the nature of that felt experience, and what enables you to, on point, you and others, to augment and cultivate that? And then Turquoise appeared with us. So how would you play this into the conversation, please?
Yeah, it's funny. What's coming up is these memories of being at the Constructing Consciousness gatherings. We just had one in Hungary before the Integral European Conference the other month. And this funny phrase emerged called the hot tub test, where a few people would be in the hot tub and then someone else, we'd be deep in a conversation, and there'd be an interpersonal sort of we space flow. And sometimes it would get, like there'd be a very transpersonal aspect to it as well, almost feeling like feeling or being a little spaceship that's floating through the cosmos, having this really deep, I'll call it a soul level connection with the people. And then someone would walk over and come into the hot tub, and it was this feeling of, oh, okay, this is the emergence. We have a new member entering onto the spaceship with us, floating through the cosmos in this moment in time. And so it feels like Turquoise has entered our spaceship. Yeah, there's so many things I could say, but really, I feel like it's a falling in love, like a falling in love, and the falling feeling is me actually wanting to move closer to Turquoise. Like I see her and my body wants to just come in closer and embrace her and hug her energetically, physically, if I could. And through also just the embrace of being like, welcome, you are your own individual wholeness. You are a part of the wholeness of this collective. You are a part of the wholeness of the planet. You are a part of the wholeness of life itself. You are part of God's wholeness. And we're now that wholeness together. And so now there's the three of us and everything else in the entire universe.
And so may I invite Turquoise that you speak to bring your voice into the exploration. We are describing this as a series of conversations that inquire about the nature and potential of gatherings at the developmental edge. What are they for? What do they enable? And what are we learning through these experiences? And and Tucker said, it's first of all not a head space, it's first of all a felt body, embodied sense or that calls me into these. What would you offer from your experience, and be as concrete in terms of recent experiences, or as broad and open-ended, to bring your voice into the experience of what is it that actually occurs when we gather small or a larger group of people and inquire together?
For me, I feel there are many different framings and narratives and ways of describing this. Some of the ones that I've been speaking about most recently are around organisming, how to organism together, some type of collective intelligence. And so, and a multimodal intelligence. The somatic intelligence is online with the emotional intelligence of the heart, is online with the cognitive intelligence, is online with the transcendent intelligence. And so feeling, a felt scent is kind of like this complexity of intelligence, whether that I feel in my body, in my energetic channel, and my chi of, oh, my heart's online, my mind's online, the sort of spaciousness of my soul and my spirit. I feel a fullness of an energetic body that's entangled with, and in a sense of interbeing, or becoming more interbeing-y, more intelligent as an interbeing. And so in these spaces, an analogy that I like to use is, as a technologist, is one of information transfer that is on something like a fiber optic high fidelity cable, where there's less or not so much posturing, and the play is with the knowledge of the costume and the identity and the ego, but there's not a lot of collapsing and protecting and I'm this sort of character, coming into a space that it's very heart open, but I would also say informationally open, as informationally open and intimate as possible, such that the energy that is coming out of my body, out of my energetic center, out of my mind, starts to feel abductive, intuitive, synchronistic, serendipitous, as we all get into a sort of flow. So I think that the capacities that enable that are a sensitivity to energy, a sensitivity to emotional state, all of these intelligence, positive intelligence, cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence, somatic intelligence, all of those spiritual intelligence that Wigglesworth work, different capabilities and capacities to come into a space where we're all growing those and aware of those and building them together and listening to everybody else's flow and kind of getting into that like we space. I'll stop there, but that's been my experience of what it is across many different gatherings. And you mentioned earlier, I think, about jazzing, about conversational jazzing and riffing, and getting in the space where we're doing some type of cosmic improv or conversational jazz, or doing, becoming, is expressed at the level of how well the jazz musicians show up, right? For me, it's like, so if you are a bunch of Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, you know, if you get the jazz artists in the space, you're going to be making some phenomenal fusion jazz music, you know, fit for the gods that we all are. So, and every space has its own sort of jam that it takes on, and the more practiced and the more embodied the practitioners, I find the funner and more intricate and complex and dynamic the jam becomes, the music is. That's where I'll end.
Yes, thank you. And do you find that this symphonic arrangement of the flow and the fusion of those different individual and communal and collective intelligence, that's the reason why people come together? That is what we are trying to enable? Or that becomes the means for something else to reveal itself with us? Or yes, all of the above and more? What is the narrative that you are holding, the big picture in mind as you describe and experience those journeys? That's a question to both of you, to Turquoise and to Tucker.
Do you have anything I could share? But I'm curious what you'll say before I influence it with my words.
Yeah, there's so many different ways that I could answer this, and they're all sort of arising. I'll just pick one, which is maybe we're framing this as the developmental edge. And so there's a way in which some of these gatherings, for me personally, and I've heard this from many others, is in Turquoise, you just beautifully spoke to this, of their evolutionary catalysts, essentially, and that's on all the different holons of evolution as it's appearing simultaneously, like different petals of a flower. Our trauma is healing, our intellect is blossoming, our interpersonal skills are deepening, our humanity itself is blooming through us, and it's like each is a different petal of the flower, and they're all kind of blossoming into life and with more fullness and wholeness. Obviously not all the time at every gathering, but often I've had that experience of feeling like, wow, all of the petals of life as they are expressing themselves in this moment that I have some awareness or connection or like interpenetration with, feel like they're all extending and being stretched and being asked to show up as well. Like there's a sense of responsibility that often comes in that experience. It's like, yeah, it's a joy, and it's fun, and it's a privilege, and it's exciting, and it's sometimes like psychedelic-y, and sometimes it's just deeply familiar, like being hugged by my mom. Like, it feels like that sort of sitting around the campfire feeling, where it feels timeless and also a part of this moment in time. And often the feeling that I get from that is a sense of, whoa, it's like, yeah, this is all a beautiful dream, and this is all just a beautiful cosmic dance, as Turquoise was putting it. And in that, let's show up with responsibility. How can we respond with the ability to love more deeply, to love more fully, to love the love that is already expressing itself in its perfection in some ways, and imperfection in other ways, depending on how we want to look at it. And yeah, so with that responsibility comes basically just a creative energy that needs to be channeled somewhere into something. And the way that I've experienced life channeling that energy through me is into more of these gatherings and into more of these evolutionary catalysts. And so it's like it feels like an infinity loop. Like the more I feed them, the more they feed me, the more I feed, and it's like, it's happening on different scales. I'm kind of speaking on the individual level, but it feels like that infinity loop is sort of scaled up in different, it's happening on multiple dimensions, so to speak. At least experientially, that's one way I would craft it. Now I'm kicking it to Turquoise.
I love that. And it's, your words have imbued my response and transformed what I'm going to say in the best of ways. I think on the shared narrative or the meta narrative, if you asked any one of us 10 times in a row, we'd give you, every month we'd give you a different answer of why, or a slightly different answer. And I'm not sure that there's, I think there's elements of similitude across why people show up. And I also think it's dynamic and it changes. And I'm not sure that the meaning making structures are shared, but I can offer up some that I've heard of communities of belonging. So a place to be and be in and of your most quintessential nature, and to blossom and unfold in that, from that intrinsic place and be held in it. So the communities of belonging, all of the things that we've seemed to have lost or put down during the hyperatomization and alienation of late stage capitalism, and coming back into groups, and the death of God, and kind of this return to community, but not just any type of community, a certain, a categorically different caliber of soul community, spiritual community, soul family, soul tribe, all of these terms bubble up, that is deeply authentic, deeply relational, building the capacity for trust and transparency and intimacy. All of the things, many of the things that people are not getting elsewhere. You may have community here or there, but how deep, how shallow, question mark, is there, and how nourishing, and how much of yourself can you show up? Can you show up in your shadow self and be held and be, can you be transpersonal, or, are you in mostly pre-rational, rational, post-rational, trans-rational spaces? So like there are these, as people are going on these developmental arcs, to be seen in this sort of multi-dimensional panoply, or this like parallax, and be seen from many angles and known in those ways, is something that I hear as narrative in these spaces, to be held in their fullness, and to play in many different narratives without any narrative in particularly being held too tightly, right? To show up in many different selves as many different faces. And I think there's a transition from, speaking of the faces of the hero with 1,000 faces, or the moving from the hero's journey to the kindred quest, or from, the Buddha to the next Buddha is a Sangha, right? So there's something about this collective intelligence and this coordination, the capacity for a group to coordinate their highest goals, intentions, desires. I'm thinking of the Ken Wilber, wake up, clean up, grow up, show up, right? So if you're developing towards the end of that showing up, how do we, okay, we've done the hero's journey, we're getting to a place where it's like, how do I do this with others? What does it mean to show up higher stages, all of these sorts of things, developmental capacities, both vertical and horizontal. How do I do that in a group? Oh, this is much more complex. So it's kind of the coalescing of getting together and the finding oneself, getting self-aware as a collective. What does it mean to have a group self-awareness? What do we do with that? What are our values and our goals? And I think some of those are embedded in the draw, in the magnetism of the events themselves and the people that are there. That is already in the essence of the pull of, and I think in a more intentional group way, like, okay, now we've become this transformer, or we become our Captain Planet. Like, we've put our part with our powers combined. Now, how do we walk around and do stuff together? I think there's okay, we're becoming this, and sensing into the animate or sentient and or natural intelligence that is coming, that is, the kind of co-evolutionary process that's coming through us, right? It's like, what do we want to be as a we that is sourced from the center, not like directed from a top down, or like, oh, it's got to be this, but like that there's a deep listening or the patience for the unfoldment of like, oh, it looks like we're turning into this kind of, I call it sometimes a mystery seed. You don't know what's in the seed, but if you kind of wait and look and nourish it and grow, oh, look, it's going to be this thing. And then it turns into a flower. And then, but maybe the flower was a butterfly. And then, or, like it kind of moves and shifts and transforms. And as long as you kind of oscillate on the edge there and kind of float on the possible and get good and flow as a group, you can kind of move it forward, but be in relationship with what wants to come forth, and then what you're adding to it, or what we're adding to it.
Yes.
Can I add something to that?
Please.
I'd love to hear your reflections as well as what you're hearing so far. One thing that feels important for me, and Turquoise, you might have a different relationship with this, and I'm sure I'll have a different relationship to this, in 3 hours from now. But for now, I feel really drawn to collectives where there's not an explicit stated intention to change or be different than who you are, or to come and transform, or to heal, or to do any of this type of stuff. And I've been in tons of those collectives for the past 4 or 5 years, and like, God bless them, like seriously, I'm so unbelievably grateful that they exist and that they've created this moment of me. And in this particular expression right now, there's this desire to just show up somewhere and to just be totally okay being who I am. And that could be really triggered, or that could be showing up in a way that I've never experienced myself before, because I'm around people that are at my developmental edge and helping to kind of bring out this new version of me that feels really novel and exciting. Or it could just be sort of a normal, everyday, average Tucker, but there's a sense of that's all okay. And it's all okay collectively. It's all okay. I'm not needing to go through some sort of system or process, or, somebody's sort of projected concept of how I should be in order to like do the workshop correctly. And so that to me is really interesting. I would love to raise children in the soil of wholeness, where there's a recognition of both it's the yes and of like, you are fully, wholly beautiful and perfect just as you are. And if you want to change, if you want to try something new, if you want to, go in a different direction, like, we have the tools and the processes and the people that can help support that journey. But it's a journey kind of that feels like a creative, natural reflection of the flower shape shifting into a dragon, or whatever Turquoise is saying. And if you go, like I found it myself, if I go into a process or into a gathering and being like, well, I am a caterpillar and I need to become a butterfly. And that's just that's like that I'm attached to that narrative. And I'm also attached to humanity becoming a butterfly. Then you're going in with this sort of mental concept and this felt sense that creates all this constriction and tightness and contraction around what needs to happen. And that can sometimes be super valuable. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't have that experience. And in a way, we all have that, and in subtle and in very subtle, nuanced ways. But there's also the way in which it's like, okay, I feel like a caterpillar right now, and maybe life wants to keep me a caterpillar. Maybe I want to turn into a purple caterpillar, or maybe I want to turn into an alien robot. But to like have sort of a fluidity and to like create an ecstatic dance with the creative expression as it's unfolding, without necessarily a strong attachment to what that looks like. To me, that's where the like erotic excitement of these gatherings are for me in this moment.
So there are 4 dimensions that there are. This is highly multifaceted. That it aggregates itself for me inside 4 dimensions of awareness and inquiry. both your rich and beautiful sourcing narrative in the way you offered it. The first dimension is the inquiry around the deeper sense of, so what do we mean and what are we discovering when we use the words evolutionary catalyst. So we talk about collective space. I, in recent times, started to shift that to mutualized space, because the word collective itself needs to be updated, and I don't know that it's collective, it's co-elective, into a mutualized space where we co-create something that liberates who we have been and who we are becoming and all of the above. So there is that is one dimension, the deeper inquiry into what does it mean and how do we experience this sense of the fusing and becoming part of an evolutionary process, where we are able to relax into that discovery, and we become that catalyst. So that's dimension one. Dimension two is I'm becoming the two areas that come from that the Turquoise described, that I am interested to explore with you and hear more about and learn more about. One is, so what are we discovering about who we are becoming when, as you said, we become that thing, and how is it informing us? And then when it becomes a space, a collective space that is self-aware and it recognizes that it has a certain capacity that came online, with the caveat and the awareness from Tucker that there is no need to drive from a caterpillar to become a butterfly, and yet something has appeared and it is now present with us. Does it want to do something, or does it simply want to be what it is? And if yes, what is it that it is revealing itself through its being and becoming? So that's actually dimension three. The dimension two in between those that I described is in the more practical, strategic, organizational, facilitative dimension. What is it you're all learning about the choreography and the design of the ecology, the experience, that facilitates these discoveries? So these are the three dimensions that of inquiry that are active for me. And then there is dimension four, which is more what I arrived with, which are the multi-layered context for me, which you in a way very beautifully described, Turquoise. For me, the context one is what I describe as the epochal 3,000-year journey. What is it that we have learned or we know about that epochal journey, and the initiatory legacy that we are the inheritors of, and how is it releasing us to possibilities, and also where are the stop situations or the blockages that we are perhaps describing that we are able to liberate. So there is the 3,000-year story for me in the background. There is the 400-year story, the rise of the intellect, the dawn of the modernity project, the myth of separation, and how that is still a very predominantly active actuality in the DNA of our minds, and where is it arresting and how are we releasing that. The 200-year story, more the materialist, industrial, extractive industrial complex, and how that is still shaping the business models and the permissions and and the limitations of the current context, and how do we manage that to release ourselves from that. And then there is the 60-year story, the post modernity movement, the throwing the baby with the bathtub water, and how so much of what I've just heard from you is an effort or relaxation rather than an effort to offer the remedy and the homecoming, as you described, Tucker, to address really all of those four narratives. And for me, therefore, I listen to what you're describing inside what I will, in my mind, paint as the next 20 to 40 years, the liminal release zone where we are healing, releasing, emerging, ascending from those epochal stories. And what are we discovering about that together, individually and together? And the big realization, the big impulse for me, the draw in this conversation is we cannot actually address these in solo endeavors. Solo endeavors were always very important in the past. They're still important in terms of the alone decisive, self-elective, self-arising journey. But all these are nudging, courting, dance moves to discover how we can come together and become an instrument of that fusion and flow that I think you're describing beautifully, where to me that is indeed what is now attempting to reveal itself with humanity. So these are the three dimensions that you activated for me, and that fourth context story that I came into saying, well, this probably is what the exploration is about. So please feel free to play jazz or do anything else with that. But that's Tucker and Turquoise, how your offerings invited me into the conversation.
Oh, I was muted. Do you want to take that, Turquoise? Or
I would love to hear you.
you'd love to hear me?
Yeah, I'd love to hear you on that.
I just want to say very briefly, I guess, you asked a question, Aviv, and first off, thank you for laying that all out. That yeah, I always love sometimes I feel like there's a great polarity between us where I bring something and then you sort of bring the same thing from a totally different perspective, and then it feels like we get to kind of play tennis somehow, which is fun. When you said, how can we, something along the lines of how can we be a part of the evolutionary impulse? I guess my question is, how can we not be? And is there a little bit of hubris or delusion in thinking that we can somehow escape evolution? Like evolution's happening over here and I'm like over here and kind of just watching it, but it's not a part of me, or it's not a part of my every expression. And so then I think that there's ways where we can maybe become self-aware of the evolution that is already coming through us and expressing as us. And then in that process of becoming self-aware, there's maybe an ability to play with it more and shape it more, and have some sort of agentic co-creative process. But it's kind of like I don't think the fish can really leave the ocean necessarily. And so there's some way in which when I say that, I feel this sense of relief, and I feel this calmness, and I feel this exhale and this trust and this faith in what is. And in that sort of emptying out of maybe the anxiety of feeling like I need to maybe do something or be something to like make something happen, there's a natural arising that often comes, and sometimes it doesn't come right away. And that natural arising is sort of just like an energetic next step. And often when I find myself following that sort of one step at a time, one sort of unknown leap into the mystery, it often feels like exactly what like something better than I could have even scripted previously. And that, yeah, so there's a lot of maybe collective anxiety that I'm noticing right now. And of course, I experience that internally as well when it comes to climate change and, all the wildfires that are causing smoke through the Midwest right now. And like, yeah, there's so many reasons to want to sort of jump and leap into some sort of action. And often the way that we start the constructing consciousness gatherings is we all just sit together and we just be in silence for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and we just listen to what is. And then we say, okay, what wants to happen now? And there's some just natural arising that happens. And that can look like all different types of beauty.
Well, to stay just with the polarity that you introduced and build on this for a minute, because yes, is there a way to not be part of the evolutionary process? It is a good provocation, is a good reframe, and at the same time, in the imagery that you offered earlier, so there are those people who gathered at the gathering, and there are those people who stayed at home and did not show up for the gathering. And then there were those people who stayed in the gathering in some other periphery, and there were those who stepped into the hot tub experience, right? So by way of embracing that imagery, perhaps the reframe isn't. This is not suggesting that one always must be in the hot tub of evolution. Not at all, because evolution happens in all of those overlays all at the same time. Also when we are asleep, and also when we stayed home, and also when we are down and confused and depressed and all the rest of it. That is probably not a time where evolution stopped occurring, but possibly is just accelerated and potentized. And yet there is a way in which there is a potent inquiry about the hot tub of evolution. That is part of what we are describing when we are exploring the experience at the edge, gathering at the edge, at the decoding edge, at the expressive edge, at the intelligence revealing and manifesting edge, whatever it is. So I'm interested and curious that you speak to that turquoise or to any aspect of what is appearing that you feel called to speak to. I kind of like the imagery of the hot tub of evolution. Why not, right?
Hot tub time machine. Hot tub time machine. I think there's a movie called Hot Tub Time Machine in the States. I haven't seen it. The hot tub of evolution. It sounds warm and comfortable and bubbly. I like it. Percolating with possibilities. It's like, oh, maybe there's like the quantum particles or the hot tub of. I guess with one of your earlier questions around the do, the doing, being, the doing, not doing, I was hearing that thread in here, and part of this I experience as a sort of trick of the polarity and the duality of language itself, of define. It's almost like a Cartesian dualism as an analogy of like, are we doing something? Are we just being? Like, if I'm sitting here just breathing, is breathing doing a thing? Like, am I, well, if I'm breathing and it's just naturally occurring, but what if I breathe intentionally? Now I'm doing a thing. right? You know, like what, how much is doing and how much is being, and becoming, so that doing, not doing, the Taoist sort of wu wei of, however we decide to structure things, are things arising and evolving in every single moment. And it feels like I'm in such flow that I'm not doing a thing, but obviously I'm doing it. If I you know, try to write a story and wrap a narrative around it, I am the center of this ego who's doing this thing, and my hands are moving and I'm talking, and but that felt sense of things unfolding. And so another way that I like to look at this, and outside of the wu wei, doing, not doing, or everything's, the manifestation is manifesting, it's doing what it's being, it's becoming what it is, right? Having that felt sense of being right in the pocket, right in the musical pocket of evolution for me, is something like a reduction of entropy or an increase of flow. I was joking with a friend last month about I'm just a quantum computer that's an optimization algorithm that's recognizing patterns and then falling into the patterns of, and then I was talking about the Noble Eightfold Path of being in right relationship with all of these sorts of things as a way to fall into the ma and pa of life, the mater and the pater, or the pattern. So the yin and the yang energy, right? The matter, finding a way to be in such lockstep with evolution that there's almost like this predictive, intuitive, guided, sympathetic sense of falling right into that. Like if you think of a drummer who's just laughing, and the bass, I'm just going to play right in and around that. As a bassist, I play bass, both bass and drums and guitar, but like, how can I be of and play in this such that entropy, meaning the randomness or the Brownian motion or the unexpectedness or the sort of friction, lowering friction. So it's, for me, it's a lowering of friction. That's what I mean by a reduction in entropy. Not that all things are predictable, but even the predictable, I can move with it like a blade of grass. It's very Bruce Lee, very Kung Fu sort of way of being. And when I'm in that, whatever that is, feels the best for me now. So that's the story. I don't know if it's being, doing, or becoming, or maybe it's all of those things. But when I feel perfectly aligned or in coherence or in right relationship with all things on the subtlest level, that's usually often the thing I'm pointing to. Like whatever that is, and whether the universe is playing me or I'm playing the universe, or I'm doing or not doing, or I don't know what it is, but I feel great and I feel happy and I feel joyful and I feel like there's less suffering even through pain and challenge and trauma, and this is not without its own challenge, and through those, there's a sense of fundamental well-being, fundamental okayness, stability. And then if that felt sense is distributed out across a bunch of other nodes or a bunch of other cells, that's like, wow, hold on, are we all doing this like low friction way of being? Like it feels so good. Like I feel like I'm floating through air, like a bunch of different hearts just, you know, and I think sometimes, or often, language is a challenge. It's kind of beyond stories for me. You get to the end of stories, but as much as we can point to each little facet of, oh, it's kind of like this, and it feels like this, and it looks like this, and here's an analogy. You know, that's the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. More Taoing, more of that is what I feel.
Is there more that you could speak to the algorithm, the behavioral algorithm, the facilitative algorithm, the choreography algorithm that enables more of those moments and enable the moments that appear to more fully express themselves from recent experiences, just in the way you participated and helped shape and design experiences and ecologies that enable those?
So I think on the there's a lot to say about the behavioral algorithm, sort of as the operating system of the body, the mind, heart, body, stomach, whatever, however we're going to frame it. Also as the autopilot. And so I would offer, if we're going to use that frame, that we're always behavioral algorithming. We were enculturated to other people, to be able to do that intentionally, of noticing, oh, I'm noticing this thing, and oh, that information is that's interesting, and kind of taking that on. The noticing at the subtle level, in myself and in others. So the higher fidelity of that noticing, the higher and the retention of that noticing, and then the being able to ride the waves with others. And I would offer this as my own self-regulation, but co-regulation of nervous system. So being able to downshift. So if we're talking about autopilot, this is moving from a automatic car to a manual car, right? Like, oh, I can downshift to 1 to 5 to 6, whatever. I can drive my own vessel and vehicle intentionally at whatever state of awareness. So I would offer that in an ecology of practice, whatever method, modality, framework, practice can offer the enculturation or the growth of that type of capacity of the intentional wielding of the soma, of the spirit, mind, body, soul, great chain of being. Can you extrapolate or add a little bit of direction in more about this predictive algorithm? Because there's a whole bunch I could say about from many different angles, both in an information theory or a computational theory or a communication theory that I've thought about in this.
Well, first I'll say back to you. So what I heard, noticing, retention or memorization or capture of the notice in which there is an integration that then becomes operative when you ride the wave of the moment, that then is co-arising, co-regulating with the others in that space. It's got 5 moves in that one algorithm. That's beautifully framed.
You're reminding me, I wrote this down. So I wrote, I did have like a 5-point, I don't know where it is, but it's similar to some of the cognitive science of how information processes through the body. I think there's also there's the autopilot, and then there's the muscle memory of like the re-autopiloting. So like you're going to offload some of the complexity into a new way of being, right? So maybe in the mornings you're kind of dysregulated and you start meditating, and then all the time you're meditating in the morning. And so that's your new autopilot. And so like can kind of stair step informational chunk or educational chunking these new ways of being. I think the retention, just like playing scales on guitar or any kind of sort of thing, you learn these patterns like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and then it just becomes a muscle memory of your fingers at one point, or your voice, and so noticing the narratives and people as patterns, ways of being in like co-living, co-working, communities, communitas, family dynamics. You start to see the same, or at least I've started to see the same narratives, the same stories playing out, and there might be a few things slightly different, and then picking up that signal of like, oh, I've seen this movie before, but also holding space for not projecting onto it and making it that, right? And like, oh, and responding, the responsibility that Tucker, how do you respond to that when you see that, and how do you do better the next time? How do you be in relationship with that, or move away from relationship with that? Not that you can ever not be in relationship with it, but at what distance is safe, is comfortable, is courageous, is in service to the highest. So I think the levels of intimacy and as distances from people, informational and relational distances. And I think I do want to say something that's in relationship with this idea of optimization algorithm on a way and co-regulating nervous systems and intimacy as trust, a model of trust that I like to think about as kind of multimodal or three-part trust of like, or two-part at least. I trust you to show up in a way that is in right relationship with me, right? And I would call this as something like a window of tolerance, right? Like think of two bands here. And if we're flowing together, things kind of go up, sometimes down, but like I kind of trust us to stay in this level of trust, and our communication, how we show up, our actions. And then the second part of that trust is that, so I trust you to show up in ways that are kind of virtuous cycles, that we're moving upwards and upwards in complexity, that are generative, right? That's part one. Part two is when we get knocked out of that window of tolerance, let's say up here or down there, and we start wobbling out, I trust you to then show up in a regenerative way. So a regenerative trust that brings us back into that window of tolerance. So that's part two. It's like, it's a three-pronged trust, right? So when things get degenerative, say I do an act or a behavior, and not necessarily intentionally, could be an accident, whatever, that we're able to notice it together. And then we're able to co-regulate and navigate in such a way that, oh, we did some degenerative things and it doesn't feel good. And then we're going to regenerate that trust. We're going to regenerate that relationship. And bring us back into that window of tolerance, right? And I would offer that second process of trust as a state and trust as a process, that process of regenerating trust over time is like forging friendships or forging steel or forging diamonds, such that our window of tolerance might have been down here. We are now at another octave up here, that over time, this trust becomes more complex, more deep, more wise, more sustained. It's the trust fall that keeps happening, and the more that you kind of test this sort of, like I think of a steel forging, the more you kind of beat on it, the stronger it gets over time, so that you have a type of trust that can maintain and sustain and evolve over time itself, right? And so the trust that has been broken and repaired is for me better and older and wiser and deeper than the trust that has been good all the time but never tested at all.
That's a beautiful, potent framing. I've been teaching to leadership team and corporate teams for many years a module that I call the 3 pillars of trust. So, and it's framed there in a simpler way. And the first pillar is the pillar of I trust what you will do, which is in a competence sense. And the second C is the pillar of I trust what you won't do, which is the pillar of character. And the third pillar I describe as the pillar of care and concern. I trust that whatever you do and won't do, you will have the care and the concern in your thoughts and in mind with me inside it. And we describe the behaviors that are associated with that. Now, what you offered has a much more of a dynamic, complexifying trajectory to it, where the revelatory potency for me in this story, in this map of meaning of trust, is what happened at the top of the range and at the bottom of the range. So at the bottom of the range, for me, it's where we break the standards to mean a place we won't go below. Something has happened that we dropped our standards, and as you said, we become degenerative versus the agreements that we become degenerative, we depreciate the quality of what it was that we developed together. And then there is what is the learning and the harvesting from that, such that there is a stronger memory system that we then construct that is able to support the journey forward. And the upper end of the range I experienced as you describing, well, what is it that we discover in the peak experiences, peak states, and how do we regulate these more to the way of daily operation, more in the way of going on as an ongoing living a life rather than seeking to be in the peak state, peak experience, peak whatever. So I don't know if you meant it in this way, but that's how I experienced the joy of you describing the journey of trust. It had, and it had the invitation that yes, as we go along this journey, there is I don't know if it's another octave period. I think it's another octave that's inclusive of all the journey that was before. I don't know, Tucker, if you want to come on this in any way and comment to this or any other aspect, please.
No, yeah, I think it's all really, I found it really beautiful and nourishing to take in. How I would reframe what I'm hearing in a very simple, maybe practical way for folks listening is to just be the change you want to see in the world, to show up in the way that you want others to mirror, and to maybe bring in the awareness that from a certain perspective, everything in life is relational. So Aviv, when you set up the dialogue and set the scene for this conversation, the energy and the tone and the words you use and the body language and all of that is setting the context in which we will all co-create together. And you're invoking and inviting a certain flavor of Tucker to show up. You're like, we're all like the birds doing the mating dance, right? But it's not just about mating, it's about mating with every single moment that is arising. And so to bring in this sort of relational, the relational aspect of life. And that's why a lot of times retreats happen in nature, for example. And because when people are in nature, they're more likely to, have maybe a calmer nervous system than they would in a city. And then from that calm nervous system, they might be more able to be with the stillness and listen to that quiet whisper. And, we could go down every single little decision that's made and look at the psychotechnologies behind all of them. And I feel like that we could do an entire series just on that, which would be super fun.
Well, let me just hold you, because that is part of the suggestion and the proposal in this series. I'm interested that we become forensic about those design decisions. Because you're setting in motion, with every decision, you're setting in motion a certain field of potential. And I'm interested in what went into those decisions and what are you discovering and learning. So to be developed. Yeah, please.
I would say that from a forensic, like if I was to look for someone to be like, who's guilty of creating this gathering the way it is, I would say it's the narrative in which the invitation is sent out, and then it's the energy in which the space is held. And that's a collective process. And at the same time, there are organizers and facilitators that are sort of leading and hemming and shaping the beginnings of that collective process. And part of the collective that is specific to maybe consciousness and some of the other gatherings we're referring to is that they're curated. And so the folks who are invited into these spaces are curated based off of a set of parameters. I can share that document with you. There's a very detailed, specific list of the types of parameters we're looking for. And so in the curation process, there's an inherent trust in the capacities for people to show up in the ways that are already helping to co-shape and sort of co-evolve or co-catalyze the processes in which the invitations are being sent out with that intention. You know what I mean? So it's when you have the capacity to curate who's there and who shows up, that does like 75% of the work, so to speak. I would say, I don't know, I'm kind of making things up on the fly here, but energetically it feels true to say that does like a big chunk of the work. And then from there, it's really sort of fine tuning. And more so than that, it's just actually like feeling my own body, however I conceive of that. That could be the physical body, the energetic body, that could be the body of the collective, that could be sort of the body of the moment as it's arising, and just showing up in the way that I hope others can like vibe from and dance from. And so it's like when a musician is on stage and they start to play the opening note, then the other musicians will attune and start to accompany and riff and jazz from that opening note. And of course, when is the opening note? Because you could say it started with the invitations going out. You could say it started with the big bang. You could say it started with the opening circle on the first day. So there's many different opening notes, and in another way, there's just one note that's being played. But having the construction of certain opening notes that have particularly potent forensic, like if I was a detective, I would go to those specific points and do my forensic analysis there.
Yes. So we're probably approaching the landing of this conversation, and at the same time, part of the inquiry that's coming alive for me when you describe the importance and the degree of fidelity and attunement in the curation process. There is a way in which I would almost ask you to put a business mindset and ask you, so what is the business you're in, and what does success look like, and how do you measure that success? Not that would maybe be the most natural mindset or a way to describe that, but there is some validity when we talk about this as a laboratory of an evolutionary process, and you are going through different experiences and you are trying to apply some debrief process and some learning to harvest and integrate those and apply going forward. So I don't know if that's the next conversation, but I'm interested in all those inquiries, because that is a harvesting wisdom process that I'm interested to bring to portals, such that we become wiser about what it is that is already happening, and how is that informing and illuminating the path ahead.
Yeah, and that process is always evolving as well. I mean, the parameters have shifted. At first there were none, but there were implicit ones, but not explicit. And then there were explicit, and then the explicit started to change. And then each gathering is informing the next. And sometimes it feels like a pendulum, but it's not just in a linear way. It's like a 360-degree pendulum that's sort of finding balance and equilibrium. And in one sense, it's always in balance because it's on the process of finding balance. And in other ways, the curating the curation I think if it ever becomes static, then that's probably when I'll lose interest in the gatherings.
Curating the curation. Yes. So perhaps I can propose and invite that you speak to, having been now in this conversation and the various experiences you've been in recently, what is the next thing you are now either involved in or looking forward to or hoping to co-create coming out of those, so that we leave as a closing round for this conversation, so that we can come back and pick up the conversation another time and go deeper into the forensics and the curation analysis and other dimensions of this, but perhaps to offer here a forward-looking gesture that's alive in you right now about what's next for these emergent spaces that you at least get to play with and in.
What comes up for you, Turquoise?
What comes up for me is I'm still in this, the trust conversation, and I'm thinking of, and I'd love to look at your trust model. Simon Sinek has a performance versus trust and a model, a 3-part model of trust, and so does Francis Frey. And there's this, I've been thinking a lot about on love and complexity and the complex ways of love. And so Tucker, when you say love is what's happening here. And there's this other thread of trust. And I think Frances says something of love is high standards and deep devotion at the same time. And she has a model of trust. And she's at Harvard Business School, I think, or Harvard Business Review, but authentic, rigorous logic, empathy directed towards you. So the competence and the performance part and the trust part, I think David Destano has something like goodwill, trust is goodwill and competence. And so there's all these people and researchers that are trying to put together, well, it's this word right here that does this thing, and trying to like pinpoint, you've got to have this, this, and this. You've got to have this, this, and this, like a few different variables and metrics. And so I'm curious about, I'm holding that there. And I'm also in another space that looks at polarization and radicalization and misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and online communities. And that's coming up in the back of my head. There was a recent Nobel Peace Summit that was talking about trust, truth, and belonging, right? People are seeking trust and belonging and are looking for truth, right? And that's not too dissimilar of what we're talking about here. And like, so with all of that in kind of the zeitgeist of my feeling, body, thinking, doing, being, there's this idea of wanting to talk more or think more through, or the ecology of practice and what it yields, right? So for doing human permaculture, we've got these ecology of practice. This practice, maybe it built trust, maybe it didn't, maybe it built a felt sense of transcendent state, maybe it was a state, it's more state heavy, right? Like, so what are these things yielding on this question of like more precision of you're having these events, something's happening, trust is being built, love is being had, psychedelic states are being felt. What is it engendering, and what kind of bonds is it creating? And I think in my own experience, having a deep repository of many different modalities and group processes and social process technologies, got lists of them, knowing which ones are more tuned towards trust or towards affection or admiration or any of these sorts of things. It'd be interesting to have a guide to those things, a recipe for culture, cultural community recipes, and that you could blend together in an ecology of practice, knowing that, a tea group tends to yield this, or this type of, I'm reminded of Jeffrey Martin's work on meditation, all the practices, and like researching that for 14 years. And these are the peak ones that'll do this. And if you put them in this order, there's 70 to 80% to 90% non-persistent symbolic state aware, PNSE, right? Non-symbolic state experience and persistent, I'm forgetting the acronym, but more talk on in your experience. Maybe we could move to those at a future discussion of the circle, the ecstatic dance yields something like this. Drum circle, everyone has to listen for it to be on the beat, right? So we're attuning our listening. We're not doing necessarily like Otto Scharmer's presencing and absencing, which is 4 levels of listening. What's the difference between drumming together and doing 4 levels? Like, can they be paired together to make them more, have it applied through music, or maybe through dance, or through something like that. The sort of art of being together is what's coming up, and defining these are our paint brushes, these are our colors, these colors, when you mix them, they turn into this color, sort of thing. So that's what was in my visualization process, and that was what was going on inside me.
Yeah, I'm hearing the designer, choreographer, artist in the studio, in the lab, playing with all the different options and looking at the portfolio of possibilities.
I think the risk in overly creating a menu, say, this is how you make this recipe, is that it then becomes a fixed thing. And what I'm more interested in is I guess having an infinite number of recipes, and then being like, well, how can we crisscross and combine the recipes, and not necessarily or entirely as a predetermined set course like you would when you go to a restaurant, but a sense of like, what if the people that came to your restaurant, you sat down with them and you had a conversation, you're like, hey, how are you right now? How are you showing up? What was your day like today? What is your experience with food and, you know, culinary experiences? And the chef or the chefs or the chef of the cosmos sort of curates and comes up with a whole new dish, a whole new flavor of life that is specifically tailored to meet the moment of that person going through that experience in that specific instance. And so that instance might be different in 10 minutes or the next day, or certainly the next year. But the idea is that like the flavors of emergence can arise unbounded. And that takes a certain, like the chef, in order to be in that role, would need to embody a certain amount of wisdom and knowledge and expertise and experience of cooking and culinary and recipes. So he needs to go through that process of creating the menus and following the, you know, the set scripts, and then doing the things, and then sharing different types of recipes from different culinary traditions with other chefs. And then at a certain point, it's just sort of like, it's the subject object thing that Keegan talked about. It just becomes an embodied experience of being able to feel in the moment without necessarily needing to think about it, what would be best for this person in this particular instance. And that can happen also with the whole collective, on a collective level. And when you have different people in the collectives that are all chefs at that capacity, or that have the capacity to cook at that capacity, at least as a state experience, you could say, then all of a sudden something really interesting can happen. And I don't claim to be there, by the way. I'm very much an apprentice chef at best.
Well, what's exciting for me, so in the interest of a little transparency, I've been playing at the personal development, personal transformation, workshop and communal events and choreography for 4 decades, to reveal something about my age. And over the last 2 decades, got to transfer a lot of it into the corporate space to unlock for me in a subset of what I've been playing with, a lucrative consulting experience, and what I am now completely immersed in this phase of focusing on the portals space as a space that invites the creative brilliance that's appearing with so many people all over the place. I'm interested that those can be brought together in a variety of formats and conversations where we get to play in all those various narratives, metaphors you shared. We were caterpillars that became butterflies in this conversation. We moved in and out of the evolutionary hot tub. We were the chef and the sous chef in the evolutionary kitchen, and we were flying information and playing in the pocket of evolution. The whole of it together. I love the full range of, as you said, Turquoise, we are literally searching with language, with the limitation of language, because language is critical and important, and is actually a second principle after something else has emerged and revealed itself in the whatever it is that we are experiencing as a human system. And inside it all, there is a prime awareness for me, which is that we are gesturing in many ways to what I sometimes humorously or wittingly or mischievously try to propose is the 5th quadrant. This is my my gesture to the integralist mind formation, which is a way of saying the more than human realms, the blessing realms that we were never meant to be separated from, but have inherited a world that was separated from, even when we were still tethered to, at least in terms of the state of mind and the consciousness and the organizing principle of a materialistic, commercial, grid-based, extractive economy that drives to maximize from humans as consumers rather than from humans, facilitate humans to the co-creative, creational beings that we are. So for me, what I described earlier as the fifth context, which is this phase we are in now, which is the liminal release zone of transformation, inside of which all that you are describing and all that's arising, for me, these are case in points, these are expressions of that bigger something else that's unfolding with humanity. I see in this more than the re-enchantment of a modern life. I see in it the retethering, the reintegration of the blessing realms that in ancient times initiates were in pursuit of, and that are now available open source, in an open source form for anyone who would care to play and make themselves available. And Portals is simply a space where we are seeking to offer opportunity to decode, to narrate, to experience, to feel, to play together. So I so much appreciate how this today came together. Tucker invited some key players and collaborators, and Turquoise, you showed up after we made a start and energized and launched us to a whole different quantum of energy. And we had the opportunity to experience what it was that we were talking about, because we were repatterning ourselves halfway through the conversation. And to me, that is that when we talk about being catalyst for evolution, that is the brain science and the information science that you are in, that where we actually get to experience that integration and repatterning as it plays out. And to me, that is the invitation dance that we are making here in this first explorative journey that we title Gatherings at the Developmental Edge, to be continued.
Thank you, Aviv. Thank you, Turquoise.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.